Imagine a man who is like the most feared enemy of the United States government.
Right.
A man who envisioned and then inspired the total annihilation of George Custer's cavalry. I mean, he's the ultimate symbol of fierce, unyielding resistance.
Absolutely.
Now, I want you to imagine that exact same man, just a few years later, earning $50 a week as a celebrity performer in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show.
Which is just a staggering pivot.
Right. He's riding a horse around an arena, selling his autograph to cheering crowds of white Americans, and then turning around and giving all his earnings away to homeless beggars on the street.
The contrast between those two images feels almost impossible to reconcile. You're looking at a life that bridges completely different dimensions of reality.
It really does. So today, our mission on this deep dive for People Pod is to explore the real life of Sitting Bull, or Tasik Itotake.
Using the actual historical records we have.
Exactly. We're going to peel back the caricatures,
Yeah?
you know, the Hollywood versions, the dime novel myths, to understand the actual human being.
Yeah, a careful spiritual leader, a fierce patriot.
And a man who is somehow trying to navigate the literal end of an entire way of life. Okay, let's unpack this, because it's almost like a modern-day insurgent leader, someone who just defeated a superpower's top military commander, suddenly signing a contract to star in a Las Vegas residency about his own insurgency.
That is a perfect analogy.
I mean, how does someone navigate that kind of psychological whiplash without completely losing their identity?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Sitting Bull's life perfectly mirrors the rapid, violent, and incredibly complex transformation of the American West in the late 19th century.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a static figure standing still on a timeline while events washed over him. He was a highly adaptable leader diagnosing a systemic collapse of his world.
Every decision was calculated, right?
Exactly. A calculated response to an environment that was changing underneath his feet at a terrifying speed.
So to understand how he became this enduring symbol of resistance, we really have to start by looking at how he earned his legendary name. Because he certainly wasn't born with it.
He wasn't.
The sources indicate he was born somewhere between 1831 and 1837, possibly near the Yellowstone River, and his given name was actually Jumpin' Badger.
Right, but he earned a nickname pretty early on.
Yes, Slow, or Hookany.
And the mechanics behind that nickname are really important to grasp. Slow was not a critique of his intellect or his physical ability.
It sounds like an insult today, but it wasn't.
Not at all. In Lakota culture, survival on the plains required immense situational awareness. Impulsivity could easily get an entire hunting party killed.
Wow, yeah.
So his elders observed that he had an incredibly careful, unhurried nature. He absorbed his surroundings deeply before taking any action.
I struggle to reconcile that, though.
Yeah.
Because you're painting a picture of a kid who takes 10 minutes to deliberate over every move, but then at age 14, he joins his father and his uncle on a raiding party against a camp of Crow warriors. Right. And in that moment, this supposedly careful kid suddenly displays explosive, almost reckless bravery.
It seems reckless on the surface.
Yeah, he rides all the way forward ahead of the seasoned warriors and counts coup on a surprised Crow warrior. For anyone listening who might not know the term, counting coup wasn't about shooting an enemy from a distance.
It was much more personal.
It was about getting close enough to physically touch or strike an armed opponent in battle without necessarily killing them. It was considered the absolute pinnacle of bravery.
And the mechanism of counting coup demonstrates exactly why his deliberation wasn't hesitation. He waited for the exact right moment, processed the risk, and executed an incredibly dangerous maneuver.
Proving you had the courage to get within an arm's length of someone trying to kill you.
Precisely. The ultimate display of martial skill. And upon returning to camp, his father was overwhelmingly proud. He threw a massive celebratory feast for the band.
And that's when the name change happens.
Yes. In front of everyone, his father conferred his own name upon his son. That name, in the Lakota language, roughly translates to Buffalo Bull who sits down.
Sitting Bull.
There it is. This was a profound rite of passage. His father presented him with an eagle feather to wear in his hair, a warrior's horse, and a hardened buffalo hide shield.
That shield-making process is intense.
Oh, incredibly. Hardening a shield was a labor-intensive ceremonial process involving boiling and shaping the hide until it could literally deflect arrows. Passing these items down marked his official, undeniable entry into manhood as a Lakota warrior.
Which brings up an assumption I see all the time in history books that I want to push back on. You might think Native American tribes operated like, top-down European armies, with a single king or a supreme general barking orders that everyone had to follow.
A very common misconception.
But the sources show that's a complete myth. Some historians in the 1930s tried to claim Sitting Bull was made the supreme chief of the whole Sioux Nation, but modern analysis refutes that entirely. Lakota society was fiercely decentralized.
Highly decentralized. To understand how his leadership actually functioned, you have to discard the whole concept of legal rank.
Right.
His authority was purely based on respect, influence, and what was recognized as strong medicine. He possessed zero structural power to simply order a warrior to do something against their will.
So it's more about consensus.
Exactly. Lakota bands and their elders operated on consensus. They made individual, autonomous decisions about where to hunt or whether to wage war. Sitting Bull's power was magnetic rather than authoritarian.
It was about how he carried himself.
Yeah, it stemmed from his overwhelming generosity, his spiritual insight, and his consistency. People actively chose to align their camps with his.
And that grassroots, respect-based leadership faced its ultimate test when the United States government set its sights on the Black Hills.
A massive turning point.
In 1868, the Treaty of Fort Laramie was signed, explicitly guaranteeing the Black Hills to the Sioux. But Sitting Bull absolutely refused to put his mark on that paper. His quote from the time is chillingly clear. He said, "I do not propose to sell any part of my country."
He was diagnosing a pattern there. He observed other tribal leaders who signed treaties, moved their people to designated reservations, and almost immediately became entirely dependent on corrupt government agencies for their daily rations.
Traded their freedom for food.
Yes, they essentially traded their sovereignty for a food supply that rarely arrived. Sitting Bull refused to accept that dependency. He and his followers remained isolated on the plains, continuing to hunt the buffalo to sustain their total independence.
But I'm looking at the timeline here, and I'm honestly baffled by the government's sheer audacity. Just 6 years after signing a treaty guaranteeing that land, Washington sends Lieutenant Colonel George Custer on an expedition straight into the Black Hills.
Looking for gold.
And Custer announces they found it. This triggers an immediate massive gold rush. European Americans flood into sovereign territory. The government tries to buy or lease the land from the natives. They fail, so they just invent a bureaucratic loophole to steal it.
The mechanism they used was as cynical as it was deadly. In early 1876, the Interior Department issued an arbitrary ultimatum.
Right, the Hostiles Declaration.
Exactly. They declared that any Native people living off the established reservations by a specific date would be legally certified as hostiles. The fact that Sitting Bull's band was occupying land explicitly guaranteed to them by the 1868 treaty was just completely ignored.
Unbelievable.
That simple administrative certification gave the U.S. military the legal cover they needed to mobilize forces against Sitting Bull.
They just manufactured a justification for an invasion. And Sitting Bull's strategic response to this is fascinating. Instead of scattering his people to hide, he unifies them.
He brings everyone together.
He forms an unprecedented unity camp, drawing in various Sioux bands plus the Northern Cheyenne. You are looking at a sprawling village of over 10,000 people gathering in one place for safety. I mean, how do you even sustain a population that large in a single location on the plains?
You don't, really.
Yeah.
The logistics of a camp that size were staggering and, frankly, unsustainable for more than a few weeks.
Just the horses alone.
Right. The horse herd alone would devastate the local grazing grass in a matter of days. And hunting enough game to feed 10,000 people required an immense coordination of resources. It was a desperate, temporary measure.
So the tension is at its absolute peak.
It is. And right as this tension peaked, Sitting Bull participated in a sun dance, which is a profound, physically demanding spiritual ceremony. As a sign of deep sacrifice for his people, he had his arms slashed over 100 times.
Over 100 times, wow.
Yeah. During the resulting trance state, brought on by the pain and exhaustion, he experienced a vivid prophetic vision.
The sources describe a vision of soldiers falling upside down into the Lakota camp, as thick as grasshoppers.
And his people interpreted that imagery as an absolute guarantee from the Great Spirit of a massive victory. They believed the soldiers' upside-down posture meant they were already dead, falling from the sky.
And then it happens.
Just a few weeks later, on June 25, 1876, Custer and the 7th Cavalry stumbled directly into this massive unified encampment at the Little Bighorn River.
So what does this all mean for Sitting Bull's actual role in the battle? I feel like you might picture him out there with a telescope directing troop movements.
Right, like a traditional general.
But Sitting Bull wasn't the battlefield tactician barking flanking orders at Little Bighorn. The physical counterattack that devastated Custer's forces was led by younger tactical minds like Crazy Horse.
Yes.
Sitting Bull operated as the spiritual anchor of the entire encampment. His vision, his physical sacrifice in the Sun Dance, provided the psychological armor. It empowered the warriors with an unshakable belief that victory was preordained.
What's fascinating here is the brutal paradox of that military triumph.
The blowback.
Precisely. Annihilating Custer's battalion winning the Battle of the Little Bighorn functioned as the immediate catalyst for their ultimate strategic defeat.
Because of the reaction from Washington.
Exactly. The psychological shock and public outrage back east over Custer's death was seismic. The U.S. government suddenly recognized the sheer military capability of this unified indigenous force.
They realized they couldn't just brush them aside.
Right. In response, the Department of War shifted its strategy from localized skirmishes to total saturation. They flooded the territory with thousands of soldiers, essentially suffocating the native resistance over the next year through relentless pursuit and sheer numerical superiority.
Which forces many of the bands to finally capitulate and move to the agencies. But Sitting Bull refuses. Facing an insurmountable military occupation and, more importantly, the systemic, deliberate extermination of the buffalo, which was the foundation of their entire economy and diet, he is forced to look across an imaginary line for survival.
The border.
Yeah, in May 1877, he leads his remaining followers north, crossing the border into Canada.
And navigating that geopolitical boundary, the medicine line, as it was called, was a complex diplomatic dance. Upon arriving in Canada, he was met by a commander of the Northwest Mounted Police named James Morrow Walsh.
It was pretty blunt with him, right?
Very. Walsh laid out the reality. He said, "You are on British soil now, you will obey British law, and everyone gets equal justice." Remarkably, the two men developed a deep mutual respect.
He also accomplishes something extraordinary while in Canada. He orchestrates an unprecedented peace agreement with the Blackfeet Nation.
A massive deal.
Yeah, the Lakota and the Blackfeet had a long, bloody history as bitter rivals. Yet Sitting Bull meets with their leader, Crowfoot, and they forge an alliance. Sitting Bull is so moved by the man's character that he actually names one of his own sons Crowfoot.
But the tragedy of the Canadian exile is that while he found relative political peace, the ecological reality caught up with them. The buffalo herds north of the border were rapidly dwindling too.
It's all connected.
And the Canadian government utilized passive starvation rather than military force. They simply refused to provide rations to Indigenous people who had crossed over from the United States.
That's brutal.
After 4 years of harsh winters, the starvation became an existential threat to his band's survival.
That agonizing math, calories versus freedom, forces his return to the U.S. In July 1881, Sitting Bull arrives at Fort Buford to surrender.
A very heavy moment.
The optics are incredibly poignant. He refuses to hand his weapon directly to the commanding officer himself. Instead, he has his young son, Crowfoot, hand over his Winchester rifle. Sitting Bull announces, "I wish it to be remembered that I was the last man of my tribe to surrender my rifle."
The U.S. military immediately treated him as a high-value prisoner of war. They held him for 20 months at Fort Randall before finally transferring him to the Standing Rock Agency.
They were scared of him.
Utterly terrified. Bureaucrats in Washington thought his mere presence would reignite a rebellion among the northern bands who had already submitted to reservation life.
But then, his life takes this fascinating detour into the surreal. During a brief, heavily monitored tour in 1884 called the Sitting Bull Connection, he crosses paths with a young, 5-foot-tall, incredibly modest sharpshooter named Annie Oakley.
That meeting is so iconic. Observing her marksmanship left a profound impact on him. He genuinely believes she must possess supernatural abilities to shoot with such precision using both hands.
He is so taken by her skill that he pays $65, which, adjusted for today's inflation, is well over $2,000, simply to have a photographer take a formal portrait of the two of them together.
Wow.
He symbolically adopts her as a daughter, bestowing upon her the name Little Sure Shot, a moniker she proudly utilized for the entirety of her legendary career.
It's a beautiful connection.
It really is, and that relationship tees up the next chapter. In 1885, he agrees to join Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. This is the era I referenced at the very beginning of our deep dive. Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to challenge a major historical narrative in the sources.
Oh.
You always hear this rumor that while Sitting Bull was touring, he would ride out into the arena and curse out his white audiences in Lakota, calling them thieves and liars, while the crowd cheered wildly, assuming he was giving a friendly greeting.
Right, the famous cursing rumor.
But a lot of historians dismiss this. Frankly, given his lifelong defiance, isn't it highly probable he was cursing them out, and historians just want to sanitize the narrative to make it more comfortable?
Well, your skepticism highlights a major debate among scholars. Some contemporary journalists claimed he absolutely weaponized his language against the crowd.
See,
There's a specific, widely circulated report that during an address in 1884, he openly declared his hatred for white people in Lakota, while his terrified translators simply read a pre-written speech about peace to an oblivious audience that included former President Ulysses S. Grant.
I mean, that's incredible if true.
It is, however, prominent biographers like Robert Utley argue the evidence for this is actually thin. The counter-argument suggests Sitting Bull was hyper-aware of the political utility of his platform. He frequently used translators to advocate for educational resources for Native youth and to navigate the complexities of reconciliation.
Okay, fair enough. It seems indisputable that he understood the absurdity of the spectacle, though. He stayed with the show for 4 months. He charged audiences for his autograph, amassing a small fortune, and then immediately gave that money away to the homeless vagrants he encountered on the streets of these booming American cities.
It is a stunning paradox.
He is redistributing the wealth of the society that conquered him directly to the people that same society threw away into the gutter.
It reveals that the core mechanics of his leadership, generosity, and the welfare of the community over the individual remained entirely intact, even when the context shifted from the Great Plains to an urban arena.
Yeah. But despite his peaceful tenure in the entertainment industry, the government's underlying paranoia never dissipated. And eventually, an apocalyptic religious movement provides the spark for his final tragedy. Let's talk about the Ghost Dance movement in 1889 and 1890.
A very dark chapter.
A piety man named Wovoka starts preaching this radical resurrection theology. Can you explain the specific mechanics of why this movement caught fire so rapidly across the reservations?
To understand the Ghost Dance, you have to look at the sociology of profound despair. The movement gained traction during a period of catastrophic drought, brutal winters, and severe ration cuts by the government. The people were actively starving.
So they were desperate for any hope.
Completely desperate. Wovoka preached a syncretic theology. If the people performed a specific continuous dance, the earth would renew itself, deceased ancestors would return to life, the buffalo herds would miraculously reappear, and white settlers would be swept away.
And the shirts.
Right. They also introduced ghost shirts, garments believed to possess spiritual properties that made the wearer completely invulnerable to bullets.
When the Ghost Dance reaches the Standing Rock Reservation, Sitting Bull allows the dancers to gather at his camp. The sources note he didn't appear to actively participate in the dancing himself, but his mere tolerance of the gathering causes the local Indian service agent, James McLaughlin, to completely panic.
McLaughlin overreacts.
He drafts an urgent plan to arrest Sitting Bull before he can allegedly flee with the dancers.
And the structural flaws in McLaughlin's arrest plan are what led directly to the bloodshed. Recognizing the intense loyalty Sitting Bull commanded, McLaughlin explicitly ordered his native agency police force to use a light spring wagon for the extraction.
Get him in and out quickly.
The tactical logic was sound. Arrest him before dawn, put him in the wagon, and remove him from the camp at high speed before his followers could mobilize.
But the police force, led by a native officer named Bullhead, blatantly ignored that specific order. Bullhead intentionally left the wagon behind. Why would a native police force intentionally ignore a tactical order designed to prevent a bloodbath? Were they just incompetent?
This raises an important question about the psychology of assimilation and internalized authority. You have a government utilizing indigenous police to enforce colonial policy. Officers like Bullhead were constantly forced to prove their loyalty to the federal agency.
And Sitting Bull threatened that.
Sitting Bull possessed an inherent gravity that deeply threatened that new hierarchy. The decision to skip the wagon was likely an act of hubris, a desire to publicly humiliate Sitting Bull by forcing him to mount a horse and ride out like a common criminal, demonstrating who truly held power. But that choice destroyed the element of speed.
Because it forced them to wait. It's the morning of December 15th, 1890. At 5:30 a.m., 39 police officers and 4 volunteers surround his cabin.
A huge force.
They breach the door, and Bullhead informs Sitting Bull he is under arrest. They haul him outside into the freezing air. But without the wagon, the entire operation stalls while they wait for his horse to be saddled. Sitting Bull and his wife loudly object, intentionally buying time.
And just as McLaughlin feared, the noise wakes the village.
The men of the encampment grab their weapons and converge on the cabin, completely surrounding the vastly outnumbered police. The tension in the air was absolute.
It was a powder keg. Bullhead attempted to de-escalate, claiming they merely needed to speak with the agent and that Sitting Bull would return shortly.
But Sitting Bull publicly refuses to comply. The police attempt to physically force him forward. A Lakota man in the crowd named Catch the Bear shoulders his rifle and fires, striking Bullhead.
As Bullhead falls to the dirt, his finger pulls the trigger of his revolver, firing a round directly into Sitting Bull's chest. Simultaneously, a second police officer standing behind him, Red Tomahawk, shoots Sitting Bull in the head.
God.
He drops instantly, and a chaotic, terrifying close-quarters firefight erupts right there in the yard.
Within minutes, 14 men are dead. 6 policemen are killed immediately. 2 more die from their wounds, including Bullhead. Sitting Bull and 7 of his defenders are dead. The brutal irony of this entire sequence is inescapable.
It really is.
The United States government didn't even need to send the cavalry to assassinate their greatest adversary. They utilized his own people, Native Agency police, to pull the trigger.
It was the ultimate tragic success of the reservation system, turning a fractured community violently against itself to neutralize a threat to federal authority.
The aftermath of his death introduces a deeply bizarre, almost macabre afterlife for Sitting Bull. His personal cabin on the Grand River was literally dismantled log by log, shipped east, and reassembled as a sideshow exhibit at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago.
Transforming the site of a political assassination into a ticketed tourist attraction.
It doesn't stop there either.
Yeah.
He was originally buried at Fort Yates in North Dakota. But decades later, in 1953, the Chamber of Commerce from Mobridge, South Dakota, hoping to boost local tourism, organized a midnight grave robbing operation.
Unbelievable.
With the blessing of a few descendants, they crossed state lines, dug up what they claimed were his remains, and relocated them to their own town.
A literal tug of war over the physical remnants of a man who spent his life fighting against being owned by anyone.
Yet, despite the exhibitions and the desecration, his true legacy, his bloodline, cannot be erased. In a remarkable turn of events in October 2021, scientists extracted DNA from a lock of hair preserved from Sitting Bull's lifetime.
That's amazing.
They sequenced the genome and definitively confirmed that a Lakota writer named Ernie LaPointe and his sisters are Sitting Bull's biological great-grandchildren.
That scientific continuity grounds the history back in reality. It calls to mind the profound question Sitting Bull posed during his surrender in the parlor at Fort Buford.
What did he ask?
Acknowledging that the plains had forever changed, he asked the commanding officers, "I want to know who would teach my son the new ways of the world."
Wow. It is the heartbreaking inquiry of a father who recognizes the old world is gone, but still demands a future for his people in the new one.
Exactly.
And that leaves us with a provocative final thought to mull over that we haven't touched on yet. Consider the concept of the Wild West. History often tries to turn those who resist into entertainment. It's like putting a wild wolf in a petting zoo. You can build the fence and sell the tickets, but you haven't actually tamed the animal. But the Wild West shows Sitting Bull performed in wasn't portraying ancient history. The government was simultaneously starving his people on reservations, while white audiences cheered for a theatrical recreation of their past in arenas.
It's deeply unsettling.
It forces you to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about how we consume media today. When you listen to podcasts, watch documentaries, or read books about ongoing struggles, are you actually bearing witness, or are you just participating in a modern Wild West show, turning real-time tragedy into digestible content? Sitting Bull understood the difference, which is exactly why he took their money and gave it right back to the people starving on their streets.